Before I begin, tell me where you're listening from. Which state, which city? I just want to know if anyone else here has ever been innovated by getting fired. I bet there are plenty. And if not, then listen carefully, because one day you'll meet a Lydia of your own. My name is Elena Ward, 47 years old, lead data architect at Biomera Analytics, a health tech company in Boston. For 19 years, I've sat at the same desk by the same window, drinking the same black coffee every morning. No sugar, no cream, no change, just like the system I built. Stable, inconvenient for anyone who wants to upgrade for fun. I'm not much of a talker. I'm the kind of employee people remember only when things stop working. And when things do stop working, there's always panic in the air. Call Elena. She'll know what happened. I don't feel proud or offended. I just feel quiet. The kind of quiet you get when you know you're the one keeping the building standing, even if no one notices anymore. Then came Lydia Monroe, 29, Director of Strategic Innovation, the CEO's daughter, Stanford MBA. Confident voice, straight hair, heels clicking like she was announcing herself as the future. She loved saying cloud and agile as much as other people say hello. And if you asked what she wanted to do, she'd say change everything. Our first meeting happened on a Monday morning, and all hands, as they called it. The room was bright white, PowerPoint slides in pastel pink. The title read, Rebuilding for Tomorrow. She stood in front of the table, clicker in hand, voice like a startup pitch instead of a talk for engineers who had already survived 3 restructurings. We need to eliminate these outdated systems to move toward the future. I looked up from my laptop and asked, specifically, which parts, Ms. Monroe? Without hesitation, she said, everything written before 2015. I took a sip of my black coffee and said slowly, so basically, everything that's still keeping the company alive. The room gave a nervous laugh. Someone adjusted their mask. Lydia smiled. That tight smile people use when they think volume equals authority. Sometimes we have to leave the past behind. I agree, I said. As long as you know how to restore the past when the future crashes. No one said another word. Only the projector hummed, and Lydia changed the slide. The word metaverse appeared on the screen. I exhaled. I knew I was getting fired the moment she said that word. I've been around long enough to know. When someone starts saying metaverse, they're not talking about technology. They're talking about replacing the old guard to make themselves look modern. Lydia went on and on about integrating patient data with virtual platforms to enhance user experience. She said AI 4 times, Agile 5 times, and future 8 times. Not once did any of it mean anything. When she finished, I simply asked, have you reviewed the Department of Health and Human Services regulations? Our system connects directly to them. Any change requires audit clearance. She smiled. We have to take risks to grow. True, I said. In healthcare, risk usually comes with a lawsuit. That night, I stayed late. The system was humming perfectly. Logs clean, no errors, no warnings. I looked at the screen. Lines of code I'd written over a decade ago, still running, still misunderstood. I wasn't angry, just pitying. A company where everything works flawlessly, yet someone insists on rebuilding it. Not because it's broken, but because they can't stand success that doesn't have their name on it. The next morning I came in early. The conference room door was open. Lydia was talking to her advisory team. I hadn't planned to eavesdrop, but her voice carried down the hallway. Elena's brilliant, but she's rigid. She's afraid of change. Someone else said, we need young energy, decisive action. Exactly, Lydia replied. You can't build new if you don't destroy the old. I stood there for a moment, then walked away. Not sad, not angry, just cold. The kind of cold that comes when you know they're about to take away what you built, and you also know they've just touched something they shouldn't. By noon, an email arrived from Lydia. No greeting, no signature line, just one short message in default font. Subject: Audit Control. Access. Elena, starting this week, my team will take over the entire security module. Thanks for your cooperation. L. just the letter L, as if that alone proved authority. I read it 3 times, then laughed quietly. Slide deck generation, I thought. They never read source code, only slogans. I saved my work and closed the laptop. Half a cup of cold coffee sat on the desk. I looked at it and whispered, if they want to call it innovation, fine. I'll show them what renewal really means. I left the office, walking down the long corridor, the air conditioning humming like the breath of an old system enduring yet another transformation. None of them knew that every script, every license, every sync still bore my name. And all of it remained under my control. Rejuvenate the system, they said. I smiled. Sure, but never forget, it's the old ones who know how to turn the power back on. They say data is just numbers, but if you stare at it long enough, you start to see stories that were never told. And sometimes, hidden in there, is a promise you swore you'd never break. I didn't come into technology out of passion. I came because of loss. My husband, Mark Ward, was a cardiologist at St. Lorraine Hospital. He died during a night shift in 2006. On paper, they called it a technical malfunction. I called it a single bad line of code, a programming error that caused the diagnostic system to misread blood pressure, and no one noticed until it was too late. One number is left uncorrected, one silent death. That day, I stood in the empty hospital room, watching the monitor still blinking with a fake heartbeat, and thought, if data can kill, it can also save. 3 months later, I applied to Biomera Analytics. Back then, it was just a small startup renting a floor in an old Boston building. I sat between noisy servers, writing the first lines of code for a medical risk alert system. I called it WardCare, from Mark's last name. No one but me knew what it meant. WardCare wasn't flashy. It had no sleek interface, no creative logo. But it had something Lydia's presentations would never have: precision. In 2011, WardCare detected an early dosage anomaly. 12 patients were saved. No headlines, no award ceremony. Just a dry email. System detected irregularity, resolved. I didn't need anything else. I only needed it to work. Every line of code I wrote had its own rhythm, like the breath of someone who used to save lives with their hands, not with PowerPoint. Mark used to write the names of his patients on sticky notes. He never called them case numbers. He said, if we forget their people, we'll fail like machines. I remember that every time I touched the keyboard. WardCare wasn't just software, it was how I kept a promise to someone who died because of a system's mistake. I have a son, Caleb, 21, studying law at New York University. He's sharp, quick-witted, and has this habit of asking why about everything, something I know he inherited. The night Lydia sent the email transferring system control, Caleb called on FaceTime. On screen, he was surrounded by books, hair messy, a half smile on his face. You look tired, Mom. Office drama again? No drama. Just a girl who thinks slides are more powerful than data. That kind, huh? The type who says innovation 3 times and thinks she just saved the world? I smiled. I built software that saves lives, and they call it outdated. Why? Because sometimes people are afraid of things that remind them of their own mistakes. He went quiet. His eyes looked so much like Mark's. Deep, calm, a little sad. Caleb doesn't know I still keep my wedding ring in the drawer right next to the server access card, the only 2 things I never forget to carry. That night, I opened the system log. The screen showed, all systems are functional. WardCare was still running, silently, as always. It didn't need praise. I placed my hand on the monitor. It felt cold, smooth, and alive. Somewhere out there, someone was breathing because of a line I wrote. And Lydia, the one planning to restructure everything, had no idea. I pictured her looking at that tangled web of C++ and Java, no comments, no guide, something only I could read. I laughed softly. She'll probably call it WardCare 2.0, led by someone who's never read a single line of code. I never take revenge. I don't need to break systems to prove a point. But I believe in fairness, the kind that data believes in, no bias, no emotion. If someone tears apart what they don't understand, consequences will arrive on their own. Mark used to say, Technology isn't the problem. People are. I lost him because of one mistake like that. I won't let anyone else die in the name of innovation. People often ask why I've stayed at Biomera so long, through new CEOs, new slogans, and now a department of strategic innovation. I tell them, because ward care is still here, and as long as it runs, I still have work to do. But now, with Lydia's hands on it, I know that's about to change. Ward care might be renamed, rewritten, or deleted, but promises don't get erased. I looked out the window. Boston was asleep, headlights fading along the street. On the screen, the log still read, "All systems functional." I leaned back in my chair and whispered, "Boston sleeps." And I, the woman who wrote software to fix a death, am about to witness another kind of self-destruction, this time by PowerPoint. I used to think nothing was scarier than a system error. Then I sat through a meeting with pastel pink slides, Comic Sans font, and people calling it strategic innovation. That morning, the conference room on the 14th floor was blindingly bright. Lydia Monroe, Director of Strategic Innovation, began her presentation. She walked in with the confidence of someone fresh out of a leadership seminar, holding a clicker like a scepter, her smile wider than the marketing budget. The first slide appeared, Project Bloom, simplifying the National Medical Data System, pink background, a faded lotus logo in the corner. I thought if data ever developed feelings, it would sue us for turning it into abstract art. "We need to change our way of thinking," Lydia said, her voice echoing like a live stream for LinkedIn. "The current system is outdated, complex, and slow. Data needs to be lighter, more flexible, and prettier." I counted in my head. Agile, twice. Synergy, 3 times. Ecosystem, 4. Enough to make the whole room short of oxygen. She drew a 5-arrow chart labeled Simplify, Sync, Streamline, Smile, Shine. I looked at the chart, then at her, and thought, this isn't restructuring. This is a fashion show for ideas. When Lydia paused to sip her water, I raised my hand. "Have you read the section on patient data that can't be deleted?" The whole room turned toward me. Lydia froze for half a second, just long enough to realize she didn't have an answer. "We don't need the past, Elena," she said, trying to sound composed. "We need speed." I nodded. "You sound like someone who's never had to recover lost data." The room fell silent. Someone coughed. Someone pretended to type. Lydia pressed her lips together. She looked at me. The kind of look people give when they've never heard the word limit and hate being reminded it exists. "This isn't a technical debate," Lydia said with a strained smile. "This is about vision." "Vision is good," I replied, "as long as it doesn't blind people." There was a faint laugh from the corner, quickly swallowed. Lydia stood frozen, her smile stiff as adhesive on a whiteboard. She knew I'd just challenged her in front of everyone. When the meeting ended, Lydia turned around and said loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "The company needs people who are ready to move forward. We can't let the past hold back the future." I answered softly, "And there are people who run so fast, they don't see they're heading off a cliff." The silence that followed was absolute. At the end of the table, Darren Monroe, CEO, and her father adjusted his tie. His eyes moved from me to Lydia. He said nothing. But the silence weighed more than words ever could. 3 days later, an email from HR appeared in my inbox. Company-wide meeting. Mandatory attendance. Monday, 10 in the morning. No reason. No explanation. Just one bright slogan. Innovation waits for no one. I knew exactly who that message was for. Monday, 10:00 sharp. Zoom opened. 117 cameras. Each one had a stiff face, a mix of curiosity and fear. Lydia sat in the center, perfectly lit, hair falling at the ideal 30-degree angle. Beside her was Darren, the CEO, the same man who once shook my hand in 2004 and said, "We're going to build something that changes the world, Elena." Now he leaned toward the webcam, voice steady but trembling slightly, as if he was trying to believe his own words. "Today, I want to talk about a culture of innovation. Innovation has no room for obstruction, and sometimes, Those who once contributed the most unintentionally become barriers. He paused, glanced at his daughter. Elena Ward, he said, you've created an environment resistant to innovation. I ask you, before the entire company, to apologize to Lydia for making her feel disrespected. Silence. 117 faces on screen, no one meeting my eyes. I saw my reflection in the webcam. A middle-aged woman, gray strands in her hair, a cup of black coffee beside her. I turned on my mic, understood, then turned it off. The screen flickered. Darren looked confused. Elena? No reply. I took a sip of cold coffee. In the next frame, Lydia tilted her head slightly, wearing a smug smile. She thought silence meant surrender. I knew silence meant preparation. After the meeting, the company's Slack exploded with messages. Someone sent a sad emoji. Another message privately. You were right. Just, please don't tell anyone I said that. The kind of support that only exists when no one's looking. I wasn't angry. I just found it funny. They wanted me to apologize for being right. That afternoon, the office was quiet. I turned on my desk lamp, opened the system logs. WardCare was still running. Silent, error-free. I saved a backup file, named it legacy _audit _pre-clean _V1. A harmless name, hiding the entire history of the system, every line of code, every revision, every mistake Lydia was about to repeat. The word save successfully appeared in the corner of the screen. I smiled. They have PowerPoint. I have data. That night, I sat in the dark, listening to the air conditioner blend with the sound of rain. Boston outside was glowing, but all I could see was the blindness of ambition. Darren thought he was protecting his daughter. Lydia thought she was reinventing the world. And me, I was just saving the original. When the future collapses, I thought, the past will still need a backup. And sometimes what remains is the only thing reminding them that I was ever here. Some people think power lies in the voice. I believe it lies in the final period of a contract that no one bothers to read anymore. That night, light rain fell over Boston, and the computer screen cast a metallic glow across my apartment wall. I sat there, coffee long gone cold. After the apology for being right meeting, I couldn't sleep. Not because of anger, but because of memory. It kept tapping at the back of my mind. 2004, Clause 14, B.1. I opened an old filing cabinet, pulled out a thick folder, its edges yellowed, the paper smelling faintly of dust. On the cover was Biomera's prehistoric logo, back when the company still used serif fonts and dreamed of digitizing healthcare. My independent consulting contract, signed 21 years ago. Back then, I wasn't an employee. I was an independent contractor, hired to design the foundational data framework for Biomera, which they later called the System Legacy. I remembered that signing day clearly, in a small room smelling of fresh paint, when Darren, now CEO, was still an engineer with round glasses. And as always, I had added one clause of my own, not to protect myself from them, but to protect the work from whoever came after them. Page 47, third line from the bottom. Clause 14D.1. In the event of termination without legal cause, all intellectual property developed independently remains the property of the consultant. I read it slowly, word by word, like a prophecy written in black ink. No one had ever revised it. No one had ever noticed. I leaned back, took a sip of cold coffee. This wasn't a setback. It was an opportunity. They thought I was just an employee, but legally, the core of the system, ward care, the audit logs, the linked modules, were all developed independently before the transfer contract was signed. When they demanded an apology without any technical grounds, that meant unlawful termination of cooperation. And according to Clause 14B.1, everything they were using belonged to me. I smiled, not the kind born from victory, but the quiet smile of someone who'd seen the end of a game before the others even moved their first piece. I opened Finder, searched inside a folder named Archives _2004. A compressed file appeared. Ward LLC underscore corp underscore docs dot zip. Inside were the documents for the consulting company I had once registered. Ward Analytics LLC. It had never been dissolved, only placed in dormancy, a legal shell, waiting for the day it would be needed. I logged into the Massachusetts Business Registry. 3 verification steps, 1 OTP code, 1 click. Status: active. Ward Analytics was officially alive again. No drums, no trumpets, just one woman, an old contract, and a good memory. I opened another window. Contract portal/Biomera Legacy Systems. Access is still valid. No one had revoked it yet. I downloaded the latest copy of the Ward Care License Agreement, the digital version signed in 2011. At the bottom of the page, in fine print, it said, "Licensed from Ward Analytics LLC under derivative software rights. See Clause 14b.1. I laughed softly, a dry, quiet sound. How ironic. They printed my company's name on every document and never actually read it. Now everything was clear. I didn't need to sabotage anything, didn't need to hack or touch a single file. I owned it, legally, fully, and with their signatures on it. When Lydia started modifying and simplifying WardCare, she had no idea that every change violated the original license. A legal error, no code required, just a signature. I opened my email and drafted a message to the legal department. Subject: Contract reference. Ward Analytics LLC. According to Clause 14b.1 of the consulting agreement signed in 2004, all products developed independently prior to collaboration remain the property of Ward Analytics LLC. I request that legal review the current use and modification of the WardCare module, which has been conducted without the owner's consent. No threats, no harsh tone, just a single line citing the contract. And anyone in legal knows that kind of email is far more terrifying than any warning. I didn't send it right away. I left it sitting there, saved as a draft, watching the words Ward Analytics LLC glow faintly in the corner. I wasn't in a hurry. I wanted Lydia to have another day or two to innovate, to erase what she thought was outdated legacy. Every action she took, every data line she touched was writing more evidence in my favor. Before shutting down, I opened another folder, Contracts/Originals. A PDF appeared, signed _Monroe _2004.pdf. Darren's signature was still there at the bottom of the page, slightly slanted in black ink. Right below it was mine, neat, straight, unembellished. I zoomed in on those faded strokes. "Thank you, Darren," I whispered. "You taught me how to trust people, and you also taught me never to forget to sign my name." Outside, rain hammered the windows. Inside, only the low hum of the server fans remained. I took another sip of cold coffee, set the cup down, my eyes still fixed on the words, "property of the consultant." Every word, every period, seemed to be smiling back at me. I restarted the computer, opened the business registration form for Ward Analytics, and typed a new description line: specializing in healthcare data integrity, compliance auditing, and legacy system preservation. An old company, reborn with a new mission. No announcements, no noise. Just one woman, following the law, that's all. People always say thank you right before everything falls apart. It's sweet and very short-lived. For 3 nights in a row, I stayed in the office long after everyone else had gone home. The ceiling light cast a pale glow across the keyboard, the same sterile glow I once knew from hospital corridors. In the corner, the servers hummed softly, breathing like tired lungs. I began my work, not revenge, just reordering what already belonged to me. But sometimes, reordering is the quietest way to show someone they've made a mistake. On the first night, I opened the WardCare license control panel. They still believed the system belonged to Biomera, but every single license was registered under Ward Analytics LLC. I typed the first command, sudo revoke license, vendor equals Ward Analytics. The screen responded, license status pending expiration in 72 hours. No error, no warning. just a clock starting to tick in silence. I added a note. Maintenance routine initiated. 3 words, enough to reassure any engineer. No one ever paid attention to the word routine. They never read what I wrote all the way through. On the second night, I disabled the cloud synchronization streams. Since 2015, Lydia had been bragging that all hospital data was backed up in real time on the cloud. She never understood that real time also meant real risk. One line in the configuration file was all it took. Cloud sync is disabled. I added another note. Routine optimization, bandwidth reduction. The next morning, Lydia sent a thumbs up emoji on Slack. Thanks, Elena. The system's running faster than ever. I looked at the message, took a sip of cold coffee, and murmured to myself. They always thank me right before I pull the plug. On the third night, I changed the metadata across every system module. The words vendor, Biomera Analytics Inc. vanished, replaced by vendor, Ward Analytics LLC. With one click, thousands of internal files updated themselves. No alerts, no warnings. Lydia had once said, I want the system clean, uncluttered. She had turned off every notification, deleted every secondary log, just to make the dashboard look smoother. Perfect. I was simply giving her what she wanted. The name Ward Analytics appeared on the screen, black text on white background. No logo, no slogan. I smiled. It felt like engraving a tombstone back where it belonged. The next morning, Lydia held a quick meeting. Everyone, she said cheerfully, Ward Care is performing better than ever. We've improved system efficiency by 23% in just 1 week. Applause filled the room. She looked at me and smiled. Thank you, Elena. You're a living legend. I replied, It's nothing. Everything's much quieter now. No one understood what my quiet meant. If they did, they wouldn't have laughed so loud. That afternoon, a young engineer messaged me. Elena, the audit files from last week are missing. Do you know anything? I typed back. Maybe Lydia cleaned the dashboard. I'll check. Then I opened another tab and saw the entire log sitting safely in a private Ward Analytics storage directory, folder path proofs, /ownership, /14b1, timestamps, user access, ownership changes. All copied, neatly and silently. Everything I did was legal. No one could call it sabotage. I didn't delete anything, didn't alter anything, just restored it to the place the contract said it belonged. And if anyone asked, I only needed 3 words, under Clause 14, B.1. On the final night, I reviewed the progress. License expires in 36 hours. Cloud Sync is fully disabled. Metadata updated to reflect Ward Analytics ownership. I added the final note. System audit complete. Routine concluded. No one read it. No one asked. Lydia messaged again. Elena, the system runs so smoothly now. I didn't reply. I just looked at the message and thought, sometimes the best thing you can do is let the system speak for itself. Monday morning. I walked into the office. The air was charged with excitement. Lydia was preparing for her investor showcase, WardCare 2.0, right at the hour the license would expire. Fate has a refined sense of irony. I sat down, opened my laptop, and saw a small line at the corner of the screen. Vendor verification required at next sync. An ordinary sentence, but if you've ever worked in tech, you know that's how a machine whispers, "We're about to shut down." I smiled, closed the laptop, and headed toward the exit. In the lobby, the Biomera logo glowed against the glass wall, reflections blurring in the rain. I saw my own shadow in it. Small, but unmistakable. Not a former employee, not a barrier to innovation, just the only person left who still understood what this system was built for, Chalfons, and who truly owned it. I don't need revenge, I thought. I just need to be right. The server room lights flickered once. The relay clicked softly, like metal exhaling. Everything was still running, but anyone paying attention could tell it was getting ready to stop. And I, the woman who had written every line of code, just smiled. Silence, I whispered, is the only language they never learned to control. Monday morning, 8 sharp. I wasn't at Biomera anymore, but I could picture the main conference room glowing the same way it always did. Harsh white lights, the smell of expensive coffee, and that collective, artificial confidence that filled the air before every historic announcement. The company logo spun slowly on the big screen, as if waiting for a new era that I already knew would never come. Lydia Monroe, 29 years old, Director of Strategic Innovation, the CEO's daughter, stood at the center. Her hair was perfectly straight, her smile perfectly practiced, her voice steady and confident enough to almost sound real. Today, she said, we launch WardCare 2.0, the platform that will redefine how medical data operates. Applause filled the room. CEO Darren Monroe, her father, sat in the front row, eyes full of pride. 5 investors from New York smiled, expectant. Lydia took a deep breath and pressed the button labeled Launch Dashboard. The screen lit up, then black. A single white line appeared, cold and clear as a death certificate. License expired. Contact Ward Analytics LLC. No one spoke. 3 seconds passed. Lydia's smile stayed, slightly frozen, her lips trembling just a little. Probably a network issue, she said quickly. Just a minute, I'll refresh. She hit F5. Nothing changed. The words stayed fixed, white, still, unyielding, like someone staring back at them from the other side of a contract they'd never bothered to finish reading. One investor tilted his head. Who's Ward Analytics? A young engineer whispered. Probably the maintenance vendor. A few nervous laughs, then silence. The lead engineer bent over his laptop, typing furiously. The server's still running, he said, but every license key returns error 403. Darren asked, What's 403 mean? It means access revoked. The system can no longer authenticate with the vendor. Which vendor? Ward Analytics LLC, sir. The air froze. Lydia forced a smile. Maybe it's a contract expiration. I'll call Elena. My phone buzzed. I sat in my small South Boston apartment, morning light spilling through the window onto a steaming cup of coffee. On the speaker, Chet Baker's Autumn Leaves played slowly and warmly. My laptop screen read, License expired successfully. Ownership verified by Ward Analytics, LLC. I let the phone ring 3 times, then flipped it face down. Nothing's broken, I said softly. It's just that the illusion ran out of oxygen. At Biomera, chaos spread faster than any virus they'd ever studied. Did we lose all the data? Someone shouted. No, said an engineer. The data's still there. We just don't have the key to open it. Then who does? No one answered. Darren looked around the room that minutes ago had been full of confidence. Now only the projector's hum filled the silence, like a dying breath. Call legal, he said. Now. A new email appeared in the company's inbox. From Ward Analytics, LLC. Subject, Proof of Ownership, Clause 14. B.1. Content. At the request of legal representation, all modules developed by Ward Analytics are temporarily suspended for third-party licensing. Please contact us to renegotiate access. No threats, no emotions, just law, cold and correct. A legal officer swallowed hard. She has lawful ownership, he said quietly. I wasn't there, but I could imagine Lydia trembling. Dad, she said, I didn't know she had that clause. Darren looked at her. You didn't read the contract? I just removed a few old sections to simplify it. The old sections, he said, were the only things keeping us alive. Lydia ran into the hallway, calling my number again. The voicemail tone played. Please leave a message after the beep. Elena, she said hurriedly, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please, talk to me. The beep sounded, then silence. I didn't answer. I opened the folder, proofs/ownership/14B1, and reviewed every line. Perfect. No syntax errors, no gaps, nothing deniable. Then I sent one more email. No subject line, just a single sentence. I didn't do this to hurt anyone. I just wanted to remind you that contracts have memories too. At Biomera, the big screen still showed that white line. One engineer whispered, "It's still alive, isn't it?" No one replied. No typing, no talking. Just the silence of a system that had stopped breathing. I stood up and opened the window. Boston's wind was cold and clean. Chet Baker's voice shifted to "My Funny Valentine." I looked out, took a sip of cooling coffee, and smiled faintly. "No need to destroy them," I said. "Just let them hear the sound of their own breathing." The desk lamp flickered once, then went out. The laptop screen turned black. One final line appeared. "System offline. Ownership confirmed." I leaned back, letting the slow jazz fill the room. Somewhere, in a conference room just a few miles away, the people who once believed they were in control were learning an old lesson. A system never belongs to the one who commands it. It belongs to the one who understands it. I whispered, just loud enough for myself to hear. Sometimes the only way for a system to learn its lesson is to let it stop breathing in silence. 3 days after Biomera's system went dark, word spread that Lydia Monroe had walked into the boardroom, still carrying herself like someone who believed justice could be summoned by sheer volume. I wasn't there, but the story traveled faster than any official report. She wore a black suit, hair pulled tight, a thick stack of files in hand, her voice sharp as metal. "I demand that he company file a lawsuit against Elena Ward for sabotaging national medical data." I could almost hear the silence that followed, the ticking of the wall clock, each sound like a countdown to the company sentencing itself. CEO Darren Monroe, her father, looked at his daughter for a long time, the kind of look from someone who finally realized the road ahead had no way back. That afternoon, the legal department called an emergency meeting. 5 lawyers, 3 advisors, 2 members from the Technology Ethics Committee, 10 people sitting around one table, none of them daring to speak above a whisper. Melissa Crane, head of legal, spoke in a calm, measured voice that carried weight with every word. "Before we discuss litigation, I need to make something clear. There is no evidence that Ms. Ward damaged or deleted data. She didn't destroy anything. She merely revoked access licenses, exactly as permitted under the 2004 contract." I read that line later in an internal email forwarded by an old colleague. Lydia had fallen silent, as if someone had just hit mute. "What?" she asked. Melissa turned a page, tapping a highlighted line. Clause 14b.1. If cooperation is terminated without legal cause, all intellectual property developed independently remains the property of the consultant. Ward Analytics is the consultant. Ms. Ward simply activated that clause. The room went dead quiet. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else tapped a pen against the table, desperate for a sound to fill the fear. A young attorney finally spoke. "No illegal action occurred. We dismissed her without cause. She acted entirely within her rights, and very intelligently." Darren's voice was hoarse. "So we can't sue her?" Melissa replied, concise and cold. "Not only can't we, but she could countersue. And if she does, we'll have to disclose every compliance violation since 2018. Lydia turned toward her father, voice breaking. "Dad, there must be another way. She just followed the law," Melissa cut in. "And you, Ms. Monroe, deleted the only piece of memory keeping this company standing." No one spoke again. The air felt like concrete. The bad news spread quickly. The quarterly audit couldn't be submitted. 3 hospitals suspended their partnership. Shares dropped nearly 20% in 2 days. During an emergency board session, member Thomas Keene muttered, "We fired the person holding the keys to the vault. They said Lydia was standing nearby, her face pale." No one needed to look at her to know who he meant. That night she sat, alone in the empty conference room, watching the news scroll across her laptop. Biomera faces an intellectual property crisis. Each headline cut into her polished MBA confidence like paper blades. She whispered to herself, "I just wanted to make things new." Melissa entered quietly, setting a cup of tea on the table. Her tone was gentle, but her words weren't. "And you did," she said. It's just that what you renewed was a consequence. Lydia looked up, eyes red. I didn't mean to. No one ever means to when they burn a house down, Melissa said. But the fire still burns. At that same hour, in my small apartment, the kettle whistled. I poured tea, not checking the news, not opening social media. On the table lay the Boston Herald, headline bold and heavy. Biomera under internal investigation for contract violations. I folded the paper neatly and set my teacup on top to flatten it. A new email blinked on the screen. From Melissa Crane. Elena, legal review is done. You've won. Not because you moved faster, but because you read every line. I read it, then smiled faintly. Won. The word sounded hollow. I never saw this as a contest. I just thought someone had to finally take responsibility for the arrogance sold as innovation. 3 days later, Lydia returned to the office. No white blazer, no red lipstick. She knocked on her father's door, hands trembling as she held out a sheet of paper. Dad, she said, I need to apologize. Darren just looked at her, saying nothing. Not to you, she added softly. To her. That night, I received an email from Lydia Monroe. The subject line read, No excuses. Elena, I'm not apologizing to get the data back. I apologize because I thought I was better by ignoring the person who built the foundation. I was wrong. L. It arrived at 11:14 that night. I didn't reply. I just sat by the window, watching city lights blur across the glass. Silence this time was enough. I set my cup down and whispered to myself, some bridges once burned leave only ash. And sometimes that's the best thing that could happen. Boston outside was asleep. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind brush past the old buildings, where justice never needed to scream to be heard. True satisfaction, I thought, doesn't come from watching someone fall. It comes from the moment the arrogant finally learn how to bow. 3 weeks after the ward care shutdown, word came that Biomera had issued an internal statement over 300 words long, written like administrative poetry, read like an apology, wearing a suit. To reignite internal creativity and optimize human resources, it said, Ms. Lydia Monroe will temporarily transition to the position of internal strategic research to better utilize her expertise in a more suitable environment. A polished way to say she'd been sidelined. Her new office, according to an old colleague, was on the 3rd floor, right next to the records archive. No windows, no meetings, no assistant. On her desk sat an old laptop and a nameplate that read, Strategic Research Consultant. Temporary. The word temporary italicized, as if trying to escape its own plaque. Monday morning, CEO Darren Monroe read the memo aloud in the executive meeting, voice steady but brittle. The company will review all ownership rights and intellectual property to ensure full compliance with legal and ethical standards. In other words, they were trying to find the keys to a house they'd already locked the owner out of. The room was silent. No one dared say ward care out loud, and certainly not ward analytics. Rumors moved faster than memos. A former engineer messaged me. Heard you're working for the government now? I replied with a simple smile emoji. But a few days later, it became true. An email arrived from the National Health Data Bureau. Subject, appointment. Chief Data Integrity Advisor, NHDB, body. We believe Ms. Ward's experience and data philosophy will be foundational to the National Transparency in Healthcare Initiative. I stared at that sentence for a long moment, took a sip of coffee, and murmured, a foundation. At least this time they used the right word. Then I laughed quietly, almost to myself. Some bridges once burned stay ash. In the tech world, my name started circulating like a cautionary tale. At the Boston Tech Ethics Conference, an HR director joked from the stage, half serious, half scared. From now on, I'll read every contract carefully. I don't ever want to beg for help from someone I fired. The audience laughed, then went quiet because they all knew it wasn't really a joke. I heard Lydia still came to work every day. No white blazer, no spotlight. She sat alone in a small room, staring at a blank Excel sheet. For the first time in her life, she was learning how to sit still. A coworker passing by whispered, "That bridge doesn't need putting out." She smiled faintly. "I know. But maybe it's time I learned to swim." Meanwhile, CEO Monroe released another memo. Shorter, more grounded. "We will conduct a full review of all legacy contracts to ensure transparent and sustainable ownership." An old employee I'd mentored a decade ago forwarded it to me with a note. "They're finally reading what you read 20 years ago." I replied, "Better late than never." That afternoon, a brown envelope was delivered to Biomera's CEO's office. No sender listed. Inside was a single white page printed with one line. "The system didn't collapse because of a technical failure. It collapsed because of arrogance." EW. No threat, no anger, just a truth. Printed cold on white paper, easy to read, just like the ones they'd ignored. I'd move closer to the ocean. Each morning, I brewed coffee, opened my laptop just to hear the familiar hum. Not to work, just to listen. On the table lay my new business card, Elena Ward, Chief Data Integrity Advisor, NHDB. I looked at it and smiled. Funny, they used to call me a legacy system. Now they call me the standard. One night, Caleb called. "Mom, I read that people are calling you the last honest architect." I laughed. "I just did what was right, sweetheart." He replied, "Yes, but you did what was right when everyone else chose what was easy." Weeks later, during a small seaside gathering, a new colleague asked, "If you ever had the chance, would you go back to Biomera?" I took a sip of wine, watching the sky turn darker over the waves. No. Some bridges burn for a reason. They stay there to remind us not to take the same road twice. The sea wind carried the scent of salt, and the sound of waves pressed softly against the shore. On my laptop, a small notification appeared. New session. Ward Care Advisory. Connected. I smiled. Not revenge, just moving forward, on the ashes I chose to leave behind. Then I looked into the camera, my voice steady and low. If you're listening to this story, tell me where you're tuning in from. And if anyone's ever called you outdated, remember this. You might just be the one still holding the power switch. I turned off the camera, but the waves kept sounding in the background, not the sound of an ending, but the steady rhythm of freedom breathing. Monday morning, my last one at Biomera. I walked into the office that had once been the heart of a data system I'd lived with for 19 years. The room was empty now, filled only with the cold glow of monitors and the faint smell of stale coffee left in a chipped ceramic cup. I packed my things, a notebook, a pen, a few folders, and that same old cup. Everything fit into one small box. My desk looked bare, like I'd never existed there at all. Caleb stood by the door, watching quietly. "You know," I said, "sometimes winning isn't about staying. It's about knowing when to go." He paused, then asked, "Aren't you sad, Mom?" I smiled. "Sad? No." I finished my part. The rest is just dust. That night, I sat in my small South Boston apartment. The city lights flickered outside, while inside, the only light came from the soft yellow of a desk lamp. On my laptop, a folder appeared. Final Archive. I opened it. Lines of code scrolled across the screen like the final breaths of an era long gone, a time when I used to write side by side with Mark, my late husband. I dragged the file into the trash. Delete. No triumph, no grief, just the quiet feeling of exhaling something I'd carried too long. I took a handwritten page titled Ward Care, Original Framework, and placed it in the fireplace. The paper curled, folded, then turned to ash. I watched the flame and listened to the crackle of wood. It sounded like the old system gently closing itself down. Peaceful. Right. I turned on the camera. No studio light, no background, no makeup, just me and a cup of cold coffee. I looked straight into the lens. If you've ever been forced to apologize for being right, remember, silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's just you clearing the table for the next course. I took a sip and continued. I used to think work defined who we are. Then one day I realized, it's how we leave that tells the truth. I spoke not as a winner, but as someone who'd seen the whole story unfold. I didn't destroy the system. I simply let it collapse under the arrogance of those who forgot data means life, not numbers. I didn't need revenge. I just took back what was mine, what they once dismissed. I smiled, a quiet, sharp smile. People say I stayed silent too long. Maybe. But the silent ones are the only ones who can hear the sound of foundations cracking. I lifted the chipped ceramic cup toward the camera. This cup has been with me since my first day at Biomera. Everyone told me to throw it away. I kept it because it still does the only thing that matters. It keeps things warm. People don't have to be flawless. They just have to be real. I drew a slow breath, then spoke softly, almost like a whisper. If you're still listening, tell me where you're tuning in from. I like hearing stories of people who left at the right time, those who didn't need to win, only to be at peace. Behind me, Chet Baker's saxophone began to play, soft and low. I let the wall music fill the silence because some stories don't need explanations. If you've ever chosen silence over argument, walked away instead of clinging on, kept your dignity instead of fighting back, congratulations. You understand me. Because revenge isn't when they fall. It's when you rise without needing them to see it. The screen light reflected in my eyes. They once called me outdated, but when the system fell, they called me the foundation. And that, maybe, was the only apology I ever needed. I paused, nodded gently. Some bridges once burned stay ash. And that's all right. I set the cup down. The soft clink sounded final, like a period at the end of a long sentence. The screen faded to black. Across the darkness, one line appeared. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it exhales. I turned off the camera and leaned back. The firelight danced against the wall, moving softly. Outside, Boston hummed. As always, but inside, everything was still. They don't need to know I was right, I murmured. It's enough that I know I wasn't wrong. I smiled, eyes closed. The fire crackled, like someone clapping quietly in the dark. Then I looked at the camera one last time. If you love stories of quiet revenge, where good people don't have to shout to win, subscribe. I'll tell you the next one. Just as cold, just as bright, just as true. I smiled again, the smile of someone who's been through the storm and still speaks gently. And if you've ever walked across a burned bridge, don't regret it. Maybe the light you see ahead comes from that very fire. The screen dimmed. One final line appeared. Ward care. Still watching. Still working. Quietly. And the story closed, not with victory, but with a long, steady breath. Warm and true.